Hello, and welcome to the History of Late Night Talk Shows. I'm your host, Jeffrey Colebank. Over the next 3 video essays, I will be looking at the history of late night talk shows and the comedians that hosted them. For timing and content's sake, I will be focusing on the major networks of NBC, CBS, ABC, and Fox, with just a few mentions of other late night talk shows that have moved to cable, premium cable, and streaming sites. Each video will feature a brief history on the talk show, a brief history of the host, and the societal impact that particular show or host had on the general public, on comedy and television as a whole. So, with that, let's do as Julie Andrews tells us to do in The Sound of Music and start at the very beginning. Steve Allen is considered to be the founder of television talk shows. He had a bustling career on the radio, doing comedy and variety shows that would often feature celebrity guests and interviews. Allen was very much a guinea pig for NBC, the network that his late night talk show Tonight aired on. It was not only a very late show, beginning at 11 p.m. and going till 1 a.m., but he had to figure out how to format the show to make it entertaining for a visual audience rather than a listening audience. So, on his first episode, Allen decided to start the show by just coming out in front and talking to the audience.
In case you're just joining us, this is Tonight, and I can't think of too much to tell you about it, except I want to give you the bad news first. This program is going to go on forever. Boy, you think you're tired now. Wait till you see 1 o'clock roll around. It's a long show. Goes on from 11:30 here in the east, that is, from 11:30 to 1 in the morning. And we especially selected this particular theater. This is a New York theater called the Hudson, and we especially selected this for this very late show because this theater's, I think it sleeps about 800 people.
This opening monologue set a tone for the show. In his very first opening of the show, he not only tells people to prepare for a long show, but it also provided him a chance to crack a few jokes and warm the audience up. This model of coming out in front of the audience at the top of the show and cracking some jokes is now standard for almost every current talk show. So, in a way, he did really mean that the show would go on forever, as his model was one that laid out the groundwork for all other late night talk shows to come. Allen also brought a very large piece orchestra to his set, providing music for the audience and for the performers. This again was replicated by virtually every late night talk show to follow. But Tonight with Steve Allen also had much more variety than what we're used to today. He would have dancers, jugglers, comedians, and all sorts of people perform on his show. But what made Allen such a good fit for the very first late night talk show was that Allen himself was a performer. He was a skilled pianist and singer. He loved to perform in front of an audience, whether it was getting his hair cut live on stage, being made into a human ice cream sundae, selling hot dogs on the street, or going into the audience to just talk.
Now let's get right down to business and meet some of these nice folks. Steady, please. What's your name?
My name is Jean Sullivan.
That's very nice, Jean. Who are you?
I'm a commercial announcer.
I wish I could say that. What commercials do you announce?
I hate to say it, but I'm glad to say it, really. Broil Quick.
Well, I'm very glad you did say. Are you going to work on the show tonight?
No, I worked on a Broil Quick show earlier.
Oh, I see. And you haven't cooled off yet, is that it? Uh-huh.
Stemming from what he knew from vaudeville, Allen would try just about anything if it got him laughs, and almost everything he'd done on the show has been replicated or assimilated in some form in late night talk shows that followed. Steve Allen truly invented a genre, but the most influential thing that Steve Allen and The Tonight Show did was offer a stage for comedians and actors who would be discovered and later go on to be some of the most famous television actors and comedians at the time. Then, no-name comedians such as Andy Griffith, Don Knotts, and George Lindsay were regulars on the show who eventually got their own TV show due to the exposure that they had on Tonight. Allen also allowed a platform for African American singers, especially jazz performers, to be featured and show their talent. While Steve Allen was a great performer, he lacked a certain something that made him a good talker and a good interviewer. That title was taken by a man who many considered to be the father of late night TV.
Here's Johnny!
Before I get into Johnny Carson, I want to mention that Carson was not the host of The Tonight Show immediately following Steve Allen. There were a group of hosts for NBC's Tonight Show before Carson. But for the sake of timing and content, I'm focusing on the big names of late night hosts, and there is no name bigger than Johnny Carson. Carson's early career was very similar to Allen's in that he got a start on the radio. But then he was the host of several TV game shows where he was able to use his humor and excellent interviewing skills with his guests. It was when he hosted the game show Who Do You Trust that Carson gained popularity and found his niche of interviewing guests and ad-libbing with them, resulting in comedy gold. NBC saw Carson's talent and brought him over to host The Tonight Show in 1962.
Now, as I mentioned, Peter Ustinov, makes movies, writes movies, directs movies. He is a movie. Not really. So he was kind enough, I understand, to send me a recording that he had made of some of the Tonight shows. Since I have been on, and it's from Peter Ustinov, and it's the best of Johnny Carson, which to me is probably the most thrilling gift. We've been on, 13 weeks now? And this is the best of Johnny Carson.
Carson made some changes to The Tonight Show upon his arrival. He took a page from the game show book and brought with him a sidekick, Ed McMahon. McMahon's role was to not only laugh at Carson's joke, but to provide support and extra comedic relief for some of the more difficult or uneasy guests. Carson also came up with the idea of having a stationary desk and set with permanent chairs and a couch for the guests to sit on. He wanted the show to be relaxed and appear unrehearsed, as he thought audiences would find it easier to watch and see these guests as real people instead of the super rich and famous. Carson also changed the show from a variety show with a lot of acts of different kinds to more interviews and a lot of comedians who could get some airtime. This was Carson's greatest contribution to the comedy world. His show, much like Steve Allen's show, featured then no-name comedians who would be found on Carson's show and instantly gain stardom, with comics like Jerry Seinfeld, Ellen DeGeneres, Eddie Murphy, Jim Carrey. The list could go on and on. Comics on his show would be unknown when the curtain was raised, but then just 7 minutes later, they would be a star. Many of the comics we know today owe their stardom and fame to being a guest comic on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. But Johnny Carson's show wasn't all comics and celebrities. Carson also featured politicians and allowed them to state their case on why certain issues in Washington were what they were, but Johnny also wasn't afraid to joke about them as well. There were many scholars that attribute that Carson's harsh and frequent jokes about then-Senator Gary Hart during his 1984 presidential campaign to the reason why Hart lost the nomination for the Democratic ticket.
It's really a strange story if you think about it. As you probably know, he, Mr. Hart, and another friend of his, I think the guy's name was Broadhurst or something like that, went on a boat trip to the island of Bimini. Have you read about that? And they took along Miss Rice and, I guess, a girlfriend of hers, and they went to Bimini. And they chartered a boat. Now, the day before yesterday, somebody asked them what the name of the boat was, and they didn't seem to remember. Well, I can see why they wouldn't want to remember. The name of the boat was Monkey Business. Now, here's what I don't figure out. You're running for the highest office in the land. You're going to take a little trip to Bimini with a couple of ladies. And you're going to go down and charter a boat. Now, all the boat names are like Mother. Or Mother Teresa. You hire a boat called Monkey Business? That's not good thinking. Nobody knows what happened on the boat, but I understand the whales were watching them.
Carson also had influence in other aspects of people's lives other than politics. In 1973, during his opening monologue, Carson makes a joke about toilet paper.
Here's a interesting item, and it's kind of funny, but it's kind of tragic in a way. Of all the shortages we have, there's a gasoline shortage. You know what else is disappearing from the supermarket shelves? Toilet paper. Ha ha ha, you can laugh now. There is an acute shortage of toilet paper in the good old United States. We got to quit writing on it.
Now, even though his statement about the shortage was not true, Johnny Carson's viewers took it as truth and began to buy up all the toilet paper in stores across the country, causing an actual shortage. By the time Carson left the show on May 22, 1992, he had hosted over 4,000 episodes. His interviews were funny and educational, and his influence on comedy and television in general can be seen all over today. Almost every late-night show host on TV and the internet has traits, bits, and jokes that have roots surrounding Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show. But even though Carson is seen as some by the greatest of all time, the hosts to follow him on The Tonight Show and the different networks brought their own influence and their own style that shaped late-night TV through the 90s and beyond.